I'm Emily Cappiello with the Gourmet Insider, and today I'm here with Ryan Burk at the Angry Orchard Cider House in Walden, New York. Ryan, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Good. Ryan is going to walk us through a Cider 101. So let's get started with, some kind of misconceptions about cider. If you haven't had a cider before and you're not really familiar with a hard cider, what is something that you feel people should know before they jump on into tasting?
Yeah, so cider doesn't have a ton of definitions, right? It can be so many different things, and I think that's one of the things that's really exciting about it as a category is, it can be dry, it can be sweet, it can be just apples, it can be apples and pears, it can be apples and hops. So depending on where you are in the country and who the cider maker is, you're always gonna find something different, and I think that really keeps it fresh and exciting.
What's the difference between a hard cider and a cider beer?
So a cider beer is something people call cider and is not an existing thing as far as I know. And then that's all right because people will experience cider sort of the same way they experience beer. A lot of the times you'll go to a bar, you'll have it on draft, it'll be served next to beer, it might be in a 12-ounce bottle, it looks like a beer bottle, and so people will call it cider beer, but really all cider beer is hard cider.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So if you haven't ever had cider before, what kind of cider should you start with?
Yeah, so if you haven't had a cider before, because there's so many options, I like to steer people, at least on our portfolio, to Angry Orchard Crisp. It's our flagship, it's really straightforward, it's perfectly balanced, it's a little bit sweet, it's got some great acid and tannin, so it's a really great way to get into cider. It's also, a really big burst of fresh apple character, and in some ways it's kind of what people expect when they think about cider. So we like to meet those expectations and actually, but then pull people a little bit on with some of those things they might not know about, like acid and tannin, that they start to find later as they get into the category and start digging around. So it's in there, they might not know it, but it's a great starting point.
So one of the ciders I really wanted to explore today is the rosé cider, because I feel like, rosé all day is not going away.
No.
So can you talk to me a little bit about the process behind the rosé cider and also, what people can expect when they taste it?
Sure, yeah. So this cider is called Rosé for Sal. It's actually a cider we started making back in 2015 before we made Angry Orchard Rosé, which was a national flagship.
Yep.
And so this is the precursor cider to that. So we've just brought it back for the first time since then. It's a really fun project. In the cider, we actually take blueberries. We make a blueberry wine, so we ferment the blueberries totally dry. We make a dry cider, and we blend those two things together basically to taste. And then it's canned for the first time. We have it on draft in the tasting room too. But yeah, it's a dry, sparkling, really fun, kind of bright, showing off both New York State apples, but also what makes blueberries unique. So it has this really nice kind of tart, sharp acidity.
What kind of apples do you look for when you're making the cider?
It all depends. One of the things as a maker that's really exciting about cider is there's so many different apple varieties, thousands, right? So we're lucky to be in New York State where some of the best fruit is grown in the world for cider making. We've got really high acid fruit here. I know you like the Newtown Pippin, we'll talk about that in a bit.
Oh yeah, I
do. That's one of those apples that has a ton of acidity, it grows really well here. So we're always looking to pull levers, right? It's all about balance. So that's true of Angry Orchard Crisp, of the Rosé, actually a little bit less for Newtown Pippin because it's just one apple variety.
Right.
But when we're using a lot of different varieties, we're trying to kind of pull levers. So we're looking at the acid, the tannin, and the sugar of that apple variety. And once we have a grasp on what that is, then we know what'll happen on the other side. So we start to blend all of those we pull those different levers to blend a cider right from the start when we press those apples into juice before fermentation. So it gives us a good idea of what we're gonna get.
So if you were going to set up a cider tasting, how would you do it? How would you taste? Do you use the 5S method similar to wine? Do you just go for it?
Yeah, I mean, to sit down and do a structured tasting, it would be similar to wine. We probably start dry and work our way sweet.
Okay.
Start still and work our way carbonated. It just kind of depends. But yeah, I think it's good to stick with that sort of standard tasting dynamic. Yeah.
And as far as food goes, we know that pork and cheese are amazing with cider, but what is kind of like a surprise food that you would pair or that you wouldn't expect would be amazing with cider?
Well, I happen to know secret information that cider pairs well with everything. So nothing is surprising to me when something works out really well with cider. And I do mean that honestly, because there's just such a breadth of styles. You really can find something that works with just about everything. I love the Newtown Pippin that we have on the table to replace white wine. So if that's going to be with, starting a meal with oysters in particular, it's just a really nice start. What I really like about cider at the table is that on average, it's about half the alcohol of wine. And so not only can I imbibe longer, gather longer, which is why I want to get to the table, sit down with my people, and like spend time together around that table, right? And of course, we're going to be drinking. So if we can be drinking the same liquid volume but have less alcohol in the mix, then we've got a longer hangout, we've got a longer time, we're a little bit more with it, and we're paying more attention to the pairing of the cider and the food. So I think if anything, that's the surprising thing about cider with food, is that we can get the same things that wine gets. We have acid, we have tannin, we have sweetness. We can have ice cider in place of an ice wine. We can have a Newtown Pippin in place of an Albarino. And I think that that's really cool.
All right, cheers to cider.
Cheers to cider.